Hi there, so it's been almost a week since the official release of Honkai Star Rail, and I decided to make this kind of an intermediate week 1 tier list for Honkai Star Rail for those people who started playing, started saving up resources, and now they consider what characters to build up or continue investing in, since now is a really important period when our early game stops and we get into the early mid game, where characters still perform not as they perform in the late game, and this might be really specific for you. You might not understand why this character is not as good as you thought this character would be, and we will discuss this in this video. Also, I want to make a few disclaimers. First of all, of course, this is just my subjective opinion. You may disagree on almost everything in this video, and this will be completely okay, since it's really hard to be objective in the tier list. And also the other thing, eidolons for 5-star characters, let's assume that we consider that every 5-star character we discuss will be eidolon 0. For 4-star characters it's really hard, because you might be lucky, for example, on Zilla banner and get 6 copies of Natasha, then she of course might be much stronger than Eidolon 0 Natasha, but for 4-star characters it's specific, so let's assume you have maybe Eidolon 2 to Eidolon 4 4-star characters. It will be just much easier to then talk about them. So first of all, let's start from Zilla, just stupidly the strongest DPS character we currently have in the game, strongest hunt character, one of the best characters for simulated universe, and you might just ask a question, why is she in S tier when she has to be in SS tier? And this is exact example of why we can't now estimate the strength of the characters, as we will do this in the late game, because for hunt characters, for single target DPS characters, we just can't get their full potential. For now we are maybe using them on 20% or 30% of their full potential, so you have to understand that, and that's why you might think, why I got Zilla, I invested everything in her, and now everything I do, I start the battle, I use her E ability, and then I wait until she can do another turn without her passive, without her mechanics. And this is really important. That's why I think Zilla has to be in S tier. Of course, we have those cheese strategies from simulated universe in which Zilla becomes just broken character, but at this point I think of course it's important to include simulated universe in like the full potential of the character, but at this point we might say that March 7 is an SS character, because she also can be a character you use in simulated universe for those cheese strategy. We also can use Dan Hank as a character as our main DPS and those freeze cheese strategies. So I think it's not the most important thing, though of course we take this into account. So Zilla is an S character because for her to actually work, she has to have specific team, she has to be really built up well, and then she really starts to shine. For now, she is just a good, strong, single target DPS, which time to time when you kill an enemy has an ability to make another turn. If you combine her with Bronya, she is already a really strong character. When they are in one team, they are both SS characters. But if you use them separately, they are just S characters, because again, Bronya is a skyrocket machine for your main DPS character. And if you don't have a strong DPS character, or as we discussed, we now just can't make all the potential uses for our DPS characters, Bronya falls off just a bit. I'm not saying she's a bad character. At some point she might become the strongest and completely immune to power creep character, but for now she's a bit weaker than she will be in the late game. That's why you might think, why can't I use Bronya if I got her, and now everything I do is just use her E ability, do another attack with my main DPS, and then do just the regular stuff. So this is really important about those two characters. I think at some point both of them will be SS tier, but for now they are just S tier. Now let's discuss some more like important character for this period of the game. For example, Bailu. Yeah, Bailu is an SS tier because, again, for DPS character it depends on lots of factors. You have to meet the conditions, you have to invest in this character a lot, you have to actually match your character's attribute or element to enemy's weakness attribute to perform well. For healing characters, it's completely opposite. You just have to heal. This is the only requirement for your healing characters. And of course, Bailu is the strongest healing character currently in the game. We also have Natasha. Natasha, I think, is a bit weaker than Bailu, first of all, because Bailu has Revive. Revive is just stupidly broken, and she on her full potential has much more healing than Natasha. The only pro of Natasha is of course an ability to remove buffs, but again, if you're super whale, you have Bronya, you don't really need another debuff remover. So at this point Natasha is a bit weaker than Bailu, but again, those two characters really good at this early and mid game. Like in the early game they are not that good because you don't actually need a healing character, but when exactly from the moment when you get Natasha from story, I think you might really want to use healing characters and they really help you. Again, Bailu is stupidly stronger just because of her revive. At some point she might be power creeped and fell off because we just will have much stronger and much more universal and utility healing characters. Now when we discuss those two, let's get for example to Tinyun, because I think that Tinyun is weaker than Bronya. She has lots of things in which she just is like worse version of Bronya, but those things actually make her on the same level. It's hard to explain, but the main idea for Bronya, you always want to use her E. You just need to spam with E to actually really make uses of Bronya, while Tinyun, like, and also for Eidolons, we need to have Eidolon 1 to have this chance to not consume our skill point to use E. While with Tinyun, since her E is much weaker, we just need to apply our E on our main DPS, and then for 3 turns you don't have to care about your E, you don't have to spam your E, you don't have to apply your E on your tank character or healing character, because again it's useless. You can only have one E at the same time. I mean, you can apply your skill only on one ally, so at this point you'll just use your Tinyun as sub DPS, just attacking with basic attacks and using her ultimate, which is to some point like a really cheap replacement of Bronya, because if you see the situation when you can't continue your streak of attacking with your Hunt character, for example, in Simulated Universe, instead of using Bronya's skill, you can use Tinyun's ultimate on, for example, Zilla. She will again apply her ultimate, maybe kill someone, then she'll trigger her passive, and so on and so forth. So this is a really strong character. I think she, in some specific scenarios, is even stronger than Bronya, but in general she's just like a cheaper version of Bronya for now. Now let's discuss, for example, Clara. I think like we already discussed Hunt characters and how they have some time to be more stronger to actually shine. About destruction characters is a bit specific for every character, and Clara is actually a really strong destruction character because, first of all, she is really easy to use. She has some conditions, but these conditions is just to be hit and to be hit like many times. That's all, because after that you can actually make much more damage from your passive than from basic attacks of almost every DPS character in the game. You just counterattack, 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 and that's actually it with Clara. Of course, you have E, which will be really strong if you have lots of those marks, but in general, she's just really good character for almost every stage of the game. I mean, early game, mid game, late game, she will always be good, and in the early game she just acts like a counter-attack unit, but in the end game she will also become a really strong character, which might be considered as the strongest AoE damage dealing character in the game, though then we really will have to get some conditions done, and then she will become like this. For early game, she's just a really good universal physical DPS character. Now let's discuss, for example, Jeopard. Again, we can assume that with that shield strategy for Simulated Universe, he is just broken unit. You can actually get through all the Simulated Universe with Jeopard, but again, at this point we can say the same to March 7, and that's why I think it's much better to keep him in S or A tier. I think for now it's still A tier because He is good at scaling. At some point his shields will really become strong, but for now those characters which rely on scaling are a bit worse. Again, I'm not saying he's bad character, I just think that for now we can do basically the same with March 7, but even more, because again in those cheese strategies you also can use March 7 at the same efficiency, and also the idea that she always counterattacks no matter what shield your enemy attacks. You just get any shield you have in the game and March 7 will counterattack. So I think she's really good character for now in the game. At some point I'm sure she will fall off. Her resistance to power creep is almost zero, at least from my perspective now. I think maybe like in 2 months we will never remember March 7, but for now her kit is not that bad. Again, we have this good passive, we have skill which is not bad at all, because again it taunts enemies, which is also important. It's not even about shield, though shield is of course really important, but about taunting enemies, which is a bit specific thing in the game. And again, March 7 for example can boost your Clara at the start of the game when you really want Clara to be hit, because if your Clara is not hit by your enemies, it means she does nothing. She's just a worse version of any other DPS character in the game. Now, since we put Jeopard in A tier, let's put our Fire MC in SS tier. This is another argument why Jeopard is really outshined for now, because Fire main character is basically one of the strongest characters in the game, because Fire main character is really simple to use. You don't need something specific, you don't have to stack up shields, you just use this character gets his stacks, this character has really good basic attacks, so at some point we can say that this character is just a skill generator. We also have Taunt, which is some kind of a replacement of March 7, but they also can be combined. The ultimate is not that bad, again, for just a tank character, so with all the things which Fire Trailblazers kit does, I think for now this is just an SS character. Again, same as with healers, when you build your team, you care about what your main DPS character element is, because you have to deal damage with this character, you have to break toughness with this character, you have these characters' gimmicks to work, while with these characters you don't care. You just can put those two characters in almost every team and this team will work. It will be a bit slow if we combine those two characters, but still it will work. So especially like taking into account that this character is completely free and at some point you are able to make all of his eidolons just without summoning at all, I think this character is just one of the strongest characters in the game for now. Let's now discuss some other characters, for example Welt. For him it's a really good position now, because first of all, we already discussed there are hunt characters which we have to have some time to make them really shine. Welt is actually a strongest imaginary DPS character. Why? Because we have only one imaginary DPS character, and with imaginary it's a bit specific, because maybe it's only my thing, but I always see imaginary weakness with my enemies. Like, it's not the thing which will be in 100% of cases, but really big amount of enemies has this imaginary weakness, which of course makes Welt really good and a universal character for just every fight in the game. The other thing, he is an agility character, so he may act as your sub DPS character at the start of the game or in this early mid game, and then you can just like transfer his role to debuffer or aggressive supportive character, because again his ultimate was reworked and now he increases all the damage which your enemy receives after dealing your ultimate. So it's really cool, strong character. He has a really universal E skill, because it has this bouncing effect when if you have multiple enemies on the field, it just acts as your AoE damage. But if you have one enemy on the field and this enemy is weak to imaginary, this means that after pressing E, your enemy's toughness will just immediately break. It's really universal. I can say that this character is the strongest. I really wanted to put him in SS tier, but I understand that lots of people think that his damage is not enough, but again, keep in mind, this character is not a DPS or erudition character, it's just a nihility character, which at some point will just become your aggressive supportive character. So it's really cool. Other thing, I think at some point of the game, if developers understand that this character is too strong, they don't really need to nerf this character. They can just apply immunity to everything he does to almost every boss, like now they do to, for example, immunity to freeze, so you can freeze almost like without some specific conditions. It's impossible to freeze boss in simulated universe, for example, but at some point I think same might happen with Welt, when almost every boss in the game, in the late game, is, for example, immune to his imaginary effect, to his E skill, so it's really specific. But I think for now, again, we are talking about first weeks of the game, this character is really, really good, and you can just simply put him as your sub DPS in almost every team, and don't care about like his element, about his real path, you just use him without any problem. Now let's talk about Denheng and Shushang. I think they are really simple in their potential in terms of damage, though they are of course different in terms of conditions you have to actually apply to them to deal the damage. That's why I think, like, in the end you will just look at your enemy's weakness and decide by this, because if your main enemy has wind DPS weakness, then you just use your wind DPS character. If your enemy has physical weakness, then you of course can use physical main character, but we'll discuss this a bit later. I think in general, it will be, if you have Shusheng and you don't have any other option of DPS character, you can just use Shusheng, though I think it's wrong to just use Denhen in every fight, because at some point when you don't have enemy with weakness which matches your character's element, I can't say you won't be able to finish this battle, but it will be really hard. It's much better to actually find a DPS. It does not have to be a hunt character in all the cases. You can just use some erudition or destruction characters and just finish this fight. But again, it really depends on what weakness your enemy has, because if you use Shushang against enemies with no weakness to physical, you can't actually use her properly because she depends on break effect. Again, if you use other characters which can break, then she might act good, but I think it really depends just on your main enemy's weakness. So those characters are really strong. Again, they are hunt, so now we can't make them work on their full potential, but at some point they will really become a good characters. Now let's talk about physical main characters, since we already started this topic. This character actually is not that bad. I think he might be in B or A tier if he was not competing with, of course, main character of fire element, because almost every time, like since the mid game, you just want to use tank character in your team, and you of course can use Jeopard or Match 7, but fire main character is so strong that you just can put him without even thinking about that. Even if enemy does not have a fire weakness, usually this character will still work, while physical main character is, like, first of all a replacement of your main DPS or a sub DPS, so it's really strong competition, and also you prevent yourself from using fire MC. So at this point I think physical MC is really C tier. Again, you can use this character, I'm not saying that this character is bad, but in this situation, in the tier list, I think he has to be put in C tier. Now let's talk about Alan. I think Alan is B tier for now, again, because it's hard to use this character like in this mid game, especially when he was nerfed after the closed beta. At some point he might become a really strong character with some combinations, especially taking into account that you don't rely on skill points with this character, and again, as we discussed, for Bronya, for example, you just run out of your skill points, but with Arlan there is no problem with that, though as your main character, I think it's a main DPS character, I think it will be a bit specific, especially taking into account that we have actually quite a bit of lighting characters in the game, and we will have even more strong lighting characters. So yeah, for now This is a bit specific option. For Himeko, let's discuss Himeko since she is like underestimated, since she's an erudition character, and I still think that erudition is really the worst path we now have. We of course have other examples, but again, with those other examples, there are more exceptions. With Himeko, she is like the strongest farming character in the game, stupidly. If you combine her with Herta, then it immediately becomes a thing where you just click one E button, and then after that you just watch how every wave of enemies is cleared by Herta's and Himeko's passive. The main problems are, first of all, you have to break enemies' weakness all the time. With strong bosses, it becomes really hard, even if strong bosses have their minions summoned regularly, so I think for now Himeko is a bit specific. Maybe at some point of the game I still think they might create the situation, the circumstances where you always have to clear lots of small enemies with boss, and then of course Himeko becomes really strong. And also we have to take into account that she's like one of two main DPSs of fire we now have, so like she is good character, but at this exact period of time, we're talking like 1 week after the release of the game and like so on and so forth, I think she already becomes to like fall off, and at some point she just will be like a farming character, which you don't really need, because you can farm with almost everything in the game, and like there will be difference of few minutes, which is not that important. Now let's talk about Chuinchue. I hope I pronounce her name right, I'm sure not, but I'm sorry for that. I think that she is a really good character. You can actually use, if you don't have Zilla, this is the best quantum character you can get now, but she relies on RNG, she has her passive to work properly, and then she will really do lots of damage actually, but again, only if you have your passive work how you want it to work. Without RNG, I think she's B tier because she's really specific. You have to match those things, you have to, or spam with your ultimate, which is really hard to make, and to some extent she does not have like a DPS skill, because you use your skill to actually make use of your basic attack, which is a bit slow, so I think she's not that good, just if you have like average RNG. If you have awesome RNG, then she just becomes one of the strongest DPS. Like she becomes second strongest nihility, I mean quantum character in the game, but again, not for now. About Herta, I think she already fell off. She's really strong in combination with Himeko on farming, though do you need farming? No, you don't have to farm. You can do this like farming team, but you will just use it when you have your Trailblaze power. After that you have to switch to normal team with normal DPS character, with normal aggressive supports or sub DPS characters, so I think it already is a time when Himeko and Herta are falling off. About Yanqing, I think again same as with Danheng, Shusheng and Zilla, at some point Yanqing may also become an SS tier. Sadly not for now, because he's really specific. I think the fact that he is an ice hunt character really makes him shine in every like battle where you have to fight one strong enemy with ice weakness, but he's a bit slow with his skill, he's a bit slow, not slow, unreliable with his talent, again if you're not making the whole team revolve around his talent, and then he like really shines even for now, but to make him work on his full potential, I think we will have to wait lots of time. At some point of the game he might make the best numbers in the game, though for now I think he's just an A tier. He's just as good as those two characters, again depending on the enemy's weakness, because it's guaranteed that if you have a strong single target enemy with weakness of physical, Danheng and Yanqing will just perform worse than Shusheng. The same comes to, for example, wind weakness enemies. Danheng will be the best of those three. About Zilla, it's a bit better because she's just stronger, but again, depending on the team. I understand that some people even use her on farming just because you can kill like 3 enemies during your maybe first 3 turns, especially if you use her with Bronya. But for those 3 characters, I think for this period of the game, they are almost the same. Now let's talk about Asta. I think Asta is the worst out of Harmony characters for now. Again, she has her advantages compared to, for example, Tin Yun, but I still think that Asta is a bit specific. Also, like, we don't really need that speed increase compared to, for example, Tin Yun's just force ultimate. So this is hard to now estimate this character, because this is like an excellent Harmony character which really depends on your DPS character. We just can use Asta as, for example, Weld to deal like sub damage, but it's not that important for now. About Serval, she's actually good, really good, especially taking into account that you get her for free just from pre-registration rewards. You can use her as your sub DPS for Lightning, and at some point she might really become a strong, like, every DOT character will become really strong when Kafka will be released, but now she's just a good character. I think maybe in few weeks she will fall off. We know why she might fall off, but now she's just good AoE character, especially if you need an AoE character against Lightning characters, which you time to time actually do. So she's good. At some point she will be maybe here, but now it's really hard. Okay, let's leave her in B, but I really think that she might become an A, like, she might be an A character depending on the situation. About Hook, actually she is good, really good character, especially if you have an enemy which has fire weakness, though we already have fire main character, Asta, and if you have Himiko, then you have too much fire characters to just operate to kill some specific enemies, so Hook is not that needed. And also I think, again, even if you fight with fire weakness enemy, fire main character will be more than enough. That's why there is no that much sense in investing in Hook at this point, but at some point of the game she might become a really broken DPS character, as lots of those 4-star characters which at some point get all of their eidolons become. But again, not for now. About Pella, I think she is same as Asta. It's just not the time for her, because even though Pella is Nihility, and we already discussed how Nihility characters are for now really strong, but if we are talking specifically about Pella, I think she relies on her main DPS too much, because first of all she removes buffs from enemies, and this is already really strong. You can remove some deep damage buffs from your enemies so they can't wipe your team. On the other hand, we don't if we don't count simulated universe, I don't think we now currently in the game have those strong bosses, so there is no that much sense in using Pella. She has a really good ultimate, but again, you have to, right after this ultimate, it does not do a thing without a really solid DPS from other characters, while for example Weld can do damage himself and also increase the potential damage of your allies. That's why Pella is only A tier, maybe even B tier, depending on what DPS characters you have. And the only character we have left is Sempo, which I now think is a C tier, just because we don't really have scenarios to use him. Maybe I'm mistaken here, but I don't think that this DOT style may even be relevant before the release of Kafka, if Kafka will still be the same character as we know her now. The main idea for Sempo is to break wind, and then you can actually do wind DOT damage. But why should you do this if almost everyone has Denhan at least a bit leveled up? You can just, for example, if your main enemy, like main boss, has a wind weakness, then you can just use Danhang, and this will be much better than using Sempo. Of course, you can combine them, but then, for example, if you have Bronya or Welt or any other this type of an aggressive support character, you will have to replace this character with Sempo, so your team will consist of 4-star DPS character, 4-star sub DPS character, and then maybe fire main character and some healing units. So it's a bit specific. I think for now this character is not worth investing, but at some point, again, since this is just week 1, I can just say that from my perspective, this character is bad. At some point, this character might become good, but we are not discussing this for now. That's all actually we see in this tier list. Again, I'm not trying to make the most objective tier list in the world. I think this one is really controversial in the end, but I really wanted to make this exact tier list like in this way. I didn't want to make this complicated tier list where we compare only characters of like one path, because at this point like making a tier list of 2 units for me is weird. Anyway, the main idea of tier list is what I talk about. It's not about the positions. Like, of course they matter, but not that much as I explain why did I put this or that character on that position. So that's all. Thanks for your kind attention and see you soon.